Hello, I'm Wayne Benson. Welcome to Wayne's World of Mandolin. Today we're going to talk about some easier chord shapes that might help, especially if you're a beginner, but even if you just have trouble reaching Bill Monroe's chop chord. This is something that I have watched a lot of people struggle with this, especially your pinky. If you're not quite strong enough to play that note and to get a good clean sound the way that we need to, there are other things you can do, especially early on if you're just looking to strum along and play rhythm in some jam sessions or with your buddies, whatever it is. You can certainly do plenty of things rhythmically other than the chop chord position. So we want to, as with anything, not just really look at this as a shortcut, but we really need to understand why these positions that we're playing make these chords. This simple two-finger G. I have a note identification video also that would help you to tap into some of what I'm about to talk about, but the intervals of the chord. This G, that's our root note playing a G chord. Now the open string right below there, the D, that's the fifth of the chord. The mandolin is tuned in fifths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Fifth note of the scale. Now this second fret note that we're playing, that's actually the third of the scale. Here's a G note. 1, 2, 3. We would also have a B note here, 1, 2, 3, but in this particular inversion of the chord, here is the third interval to help make up the chord. So there we already have it. There's the root, the fifth, and now the third. So this last note is also a G, the third fret of the E string. So that's why this position that we learn, that's why it's a G chord. And that is way easier to play physically than the chop chord. We might be able to actually vamp. I'm using my ring finger and my pinky, so even with this chord, I can play a chop. It's a little bit different rhythmically, the feel of that, where my whole hand is muting the strings that are beneath each finger, where this, just this finger is actually muting all 8 of the strings. I'm sure you've heard players do this in A and some other positions. We're going to get to that today too, but for right now, think of this 2 different ways that you could strum that chord. Whatever rhythm pattern that you're comfortable with your right hand, or vamp the chord, to be able to chop. Okay, so from here, we're going to do this with G, C, and D, the same steps that we kind of went through with the arpeggio video that I have. This one, for the C, again, just 2 fingers. Now that's exactly the same inversion that we would have with the bottom 3 strings. There's the 5, the 3, and the 1 of the G chord. If I move that exact thought up to the top 3 pairs of strings, there's the 5 of my C chord, here's the third, and here's the root. And if we can keep the E string nice and clean, sometimes the bottom of your middle finger might want to mute that note. We don't have to have it because there's already an E note here. We're doubling the third when we play this C, where with the G we were doubling the root note of G. So here, that's our simple version of a C chord. You probably know that shape. Now maybe there's a better understanding of the notes that we're using and why they make the C chord, because of being those intervals 1, 3, and 5. And you could play the E strings open as well. our strum, and of course, a chop. Not with Bill Monroe's, not that closed position, but still vamping with your ring finger and your pinky. A clean chop like that right in between the bass notes, or a busier, something rhythmically like that. All of those things you could still be working on with your right hand, even if you're not ready for the closed position chop. Okay, so on to the D. And this is where, depending on the voicing that we play, different things are going to happen, because we have the root note here for D, and then an open A string, which is the fifth, of course. So to play this chord in first position, you see a lot of this, which would make the full chord. Here's the fifth. There's an A note in the bottom of the chord. Now an open D and open A. So in this particular chord, we're doubling the fifth scale degree. An A note there and here. And our third is an F sharp note, 1, 2, 3, third of the scale. We're playing that note on the E string at the second fret. So that's a really campfire sounding version of a D chord. Sometimes for this chord, I'll just play the 7th fret. Again, note identification. The 7th fret of the G string is also a D note. So that takes us to that double note that we talk about a lot. Sometimes I'll play that note and then leave the E string open. Even though that's making it a different voice for the chord, sometimes I would just rather hear that E note instead of the F sharp. And I'm throwing that out there because even this position can be a little tricky if you're just getting started. So if we do, just let that E note be what it is and play one single note, the 2nd fret of the G string for the D chord. And we could certainly, there we are, vamping with these. At this point, even my middle finger is part of that, stopping the mandolin from ringing so that we have that vamp going on. So with having said all that, I'm just going to strum through the G, C, and D chords, open sounding voicings, simple shapes with our left hand. Now the C, or with the open E string, back to G. You may have noticed that little rhythmic thing, and I'm breaking that up. Singling out the strings like that to play like a roll kind of pattern in the middle of the rhythm strum. Those are all things that we can be working on with our right hand, even though, like I'm saying, you may not be ready yet. Just physically, your hand might not be strong enough yet to pull off the chop chord. So there's a lot that we can do with open positions like this, simple shapes in first position for G, C, and D. Now, another for the actual chop, and this is working on both hands, and the coordination of muting the strings, because it's a different feel than a chop that when we think of a traditional bluegrass chop, but we can use these shapes and still mute with these fingers. C, D, back to G. So with those shapes, we're going to be able to play a strummy, I like to call it an airy sounding rhythm, where there's a lot of the chord is coming out of the mandolin. Constantly you're able to hear the exact chord that you're playing, compared to where we can still hear that it's a G chord, but then we have the percussion sound of the pick across the string. So it becomes a combination of those two things that you're trying to find the sweet spot and get by with just simple two-finger shapes like this to even pull off a chop approach. So plenty to work on with this. I hope it can help you if you have struggled. Again, a lot of my students will say that they're going to a jam session, but they're just not ready for the chop chord yet. This is a way around it for, in this case, the key of G, which happens to be one of the most common jam session chords that we're going to run into. Okay, I hope this video, like all the others, I hope it can be a help. If it is, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to use the link to try to get to me at Facebook, you can private message for some one-on-one Skype sessions. I hope you enjoy this rhythm stuff that we talked about. I do.